Hi, I'm Dennis Toddy, if you haven't heard already, Director of the USDA Midwest Climate Hub. Mentioned we are housed in Ames, Iowa at the National Laboratory for Agriculture and the Environment. Unlike Emily, I was not the original director. My former boss, Jerry Hatfield, was the original director, took over from him about 4 years ago. We're going to talk about some aspects of what we're doing related to conservation efforts and some activities in the Midwest. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. One of our biggest issues that we're dealing with in the way of conservation in soils is directly related to changing in the way of precipitation, climate change related to precipitation. At least one presentation already has used this graphic. What this is a graphic from the last National Climate Assessment, the science assessment with the National Climate Assessment, and shows how precipitation is changing nationally. The greenest areas are greater than 15% increases in precipitation over the last century. The browner areas are places where we're seeing decreases in precipitation. So our region, our 8-state region, Minnesota, Missouri, over to Michigan and Ohio, and then we do kind of share across the northern plains with Bunnell, is at the epicenter for some of the biggest changes in precipitation. While that is interesting in and of itself, it is presenting a set of issues related to agriculture that are making agriculture more difficult and soil issues more difficult. If we break this down by season, specifically, the greenest, if you look off the right here, you see springtime precipitation is one of the biggest increases we've seen, and fall increases across this region. And for anybody who's involved with agriculture understands that is a huge potential for soil and nutrient loss problems, because in the spring, unless you're using a cover crop, you probably have, and especially if you're using tillage, the soils are completely exposed. Any kind of rainfall can lead to soil and nutrient loss, in addition to being able to get farm activity in the field, leads to compaction. I've referred to this year as the sins of last year, after the very wet season we had last year and people trying to get row crops in. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And yeah, just zooming up in on the summer and fall precipitation here. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So here's a couple other examples. Let's go to the next one, Kate, that shows specifics on some of that precipitation. Here is, this is data from NOAA, from the National Center for Environmental Information, showing spring, March, April, May precipitation for the state of Iowa, average from 1895 on the left until 2020 on the right. And then the green line connects the years, the red line is a running average, and then the blue line is the overall trend, and showing how precipitation has changed in the springtime. And the scale on the left-hand side is inches, so the long-term average is 9 inches. And you can see that over the last 25 years particularly, we have had very few years that are below that long-term average and a number of years that are well above that long-term average, which has made soil management a very difficult issue and led to additional soil problems that we're seeing across the region. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Specifically, the last 2 years, this is data from Minnesota, and this is annual data, and this is to 24 months, so a 2-year summation of precipitation. You can see what has happened incredibly over the last few years. In fact, the 2018 and 2019 for Minnesota was their wettest 2-year period ever, and then you can see that beat 2016, 2017, I believe. So you have more frequent big rainfalls and additional precipitation that's making it very difficult to manage soils and agricultural issues across our region. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So more water to deal with presents, this was a graphic used in one of the national climate assessments. When you have tillage, this is what you can end up with when you have these extreme rainfalls, or even not extreme rainfalls. We have even seen some rainfalls occurring on frozen ground. A half inch of rainfall on frozen ground, which is leading to soil loss. So soil loss issues, nutrient loss issues, planting, harvesting issues, and then you've also heard in other places today talking about drainage, increased usage of drainage, which is one adaptation mechanism to be able to try to deal with some of these issues. So these are things that we work with in the laboratory where we're housed, but also on our own. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So some of the things that we've done with this are some of the reports, talking about some of the impact reports. This one is drawn from a report for the Midwest region from 2019. This is from the U.S. or one of our partners, the Midwest Regional Climate Center, a NOAA-funded climate center, did a report on the extremes of 2019 and some of the issues related to it. One of those issues, this is from the USDA RMA Risk Management Agency on crop indemnities, on payouts by on the county level of the darkest areas were over $10 million per county in indemnities paid out last year, most of them because of either prevented planting or planting in too wet conditions and getting an indemnity payment because of that. So a lot of the area, and especially in the Red River Valley area, the eastern South Dakota, western Minnesota, and a few other pockets with extreme rainfall last year. Go to the next slide. So, and also in trying to do some of this, we try to get ahead of events sometimes, because if we're able to warn people ahead, they may have an ability to mitigate and reduce some of the issues ahead of time by either being able to plant ahead of an event or waiting to plant until after an event. So we do have some big event releases when we're able to see an event coming in a week's time frame or potential for a large event, extreme wetness or something like that. We work with our NOAA partners and put out some advanced issues of some of these. In contrast, right now we're dealing with drought in western Iowa. While we still have some of these extremes of rainfall, we still have drought issues that we're dealing with. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Also related to this, we do ag outlooks, where we also try to give people heads up and talk about what is happening, what we can say with NOAA Outlook products from a monthly and seasonal perspective and how they impact agriculture. This has been one of our more successful issues of products that we've been able to get to put out to people. Let's go ahead to the next slide. And then the next thing that our next steps, I hope to be able to report on this, but we haven't been able to make progress with this, is talking more about how these climate change issues are impacting water quality in our region. There is great interest here and other places in taking steps to mitigate climate change issues and to reduce water quality issues, but there's concerns that with the changing climate, we're worsening our issues that may make our current capabilities very difficult to deal with. So, what additional are we going to have to do to try to deal with water quality issues because of the changing climate issues? We have several partners interested in working on this, and there'll be more happening related to this over time. And I think that is where we are. Let's go to the next slide with my contact information. And I need to change this because right now you can cut out two, whoever these three people are. I'm flying solo here. We've lost our coordinator and postdoc fellow. We're in process of trying to replace them right now. So thank you. And now we're going to hand it over to, let's see, who's next? Is it Danelle or Emily again?
It's me.
It's Emily.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Dennis. We're going from one extreme to the other. We're going from the Midwest extreme precipitation and the challenges that that's caused. And actually, it's so interesting for me to see graphs that actually show increased precipitation because, of course, my region of the Southwest, you don't see that. You'll see increased temperature in the observed data, but we haven't seen that, certainly not an increase in precipitation, and one's not projected, which makes this dust mitigation handbook even more timely and important. So this is a really good One USDA story. This is a collaborative effort between the NRCS, the Agricultural Research Service, and two climate hubs, along with the state climatologist, researchers from New Mexico State University, the climate lead from NRCS, and NRCS air quality specialists. So Steve Smerek, who was the state resource conservationist with NRCS for Arizona, became a liaison with the climate hubs, and that's an option that I wanted to let everyone on the call know about, because if there's a climate issue or concern you'd like to delve into for a year and work with the climate hub, that is an opportunity going forward, and we really appreciate the knowledge that our NRCS colleagues have, especially about programs and applications on the ground. Steve was really concerned because Lake Mead water levels were dropping a few years ago to the point where croplands in southern Arizona weren't going to be irrigated, and he saw that as a potential dust source and one that they didn't have any direct mitigation opportunities or practices that he could share. And so he came to us and we started working on the dust mitigation handbook. Next slide. So just as a little bit of background here, this is we're talking from the 4th National Climate Assessment, the first volume, which is the Climate Science Special Report. And we're looking at projected changes in soil moisture. This is surface soil moisture by the end of the century under the higher emissions scenario, or RCP 8.5. And what you can see here seasonally is that for most of the United States, soil moisture is projected to decrease in almost all of the seasons. Canada fares a little better in the winter and spring, but for the most part, when you look at these maps, you can see that soil moisture is projected to decrease, especially in my region, the southwestern part of the United States. And so the key message here is that future decreases in surface soil moisture from human activities over most of the United States are likely, and that's due to increased evapotranspiration caused by higher temperatures. So we're already dealing with these issues related to Lake Mead and soil moisture and dry soil conditions, but the projections for the future look like we may have a decrease in soil moisture, and that could lead to more of a need for a dust mitigation handbook. Next slide, please. So some of the impacts from particulate matter include health impacts. Those are especially related to people with respiratory conditions and asthma. There are also visibility impacts, and this picture was taken off of I-10 in New Mexico near Lordsburg. There, that road is often shut down because of dust storms, and so that's definitely an issue currently and something that could continue into the future. And then, of course, there are deposition impacts. When that topsoil, that surface soil is moved, where will it land? How will that impact the cropland or other uses there? Next slide, please. And so early in 2018, Steve Smerick with NRCS came to the Climate Hub and we identified this problem. And we had our first team meeting about 2.5 years ago, February 2018. And then we held our first group meeting at the Soil and Water Conservation Society meeting 2 years ago in Albuquerque. That was a Southern U.S. Dust Monitoring and Mitigation Symposium. All of those presentations were recorded and saved, and they're posted on our website. And one of the best things about that symposium is that these were leading aeolian researchers that were listening, and they came up with some key science knowledge gaps and science needs. And so those are also posted on the website along with the online dust mitigation handbook. So that's available now to download in its entirety or by chapter. And that was the subject of a conservation webinar that about 180 people attended, and it's still available. It's on the resource tab that I'll show you in a minute. So if you're interested in this resource, you can hear from the people who developed it in this conservation webinar that's still available now. And I'll show you some of, next slide, please. So these are the components of the Dust Mitigation Handbook. We have 8 chapters. We also have a glossary, some appendices, and then there's this resources tab, and that's where you'll find the webinar that I mentioned, where you'll also find those key science knowledge gaps and the presentations from the Soil and Water Conservation Society 2 years ago. The handbook itself talks about hazards and concerns of airborne particulates, gives a deeper understanding of wind erosion, how wind erosion is modeled and predicted, Also, how to measure airborne particulates. So some of the basic science is in the first 4 chapters. And then we get into conservation planning for wind erosion, resource concerns, and we get specifically into practices that can be used on cropland for wind erosion abatement. In Chapter 7, we talk about wind erosion on rangeland, natural areas, and unpaved surfaces. And then we have a separate chapter that focuses on USDA programs to address wind erosion. So this is, as I said, you can download it in its entirety, or you can download each of the chapters. Next slide, please. And we just printed hard copies of this. So if you're interested in a hard copy, please just put that information into the Q&A box, and I'll be happy to share it with you, or send me an email. My email address is here. I'd be happy to share a hard copy of the Dust Mitigation Handbook with you. We will also be at the Tri-Societies meeting in November, and we'll be talking about regional linkages between production, agriculture, air quality, and climate. So we'll be talking about this handbook, but also more broadly a national air quality synthesis related to agriculture and climate change, and also looking specifically at some pesticide drift issues in the Midwest with Dennis and his team. So we'll be there, and this was a really nice example of how these projects evolve and develop to cope with an issue that is currently occurring, but that we anticipate in the future with climate change. Thanks.
Thanks, Emily. If folks have any questions for Dennis or Emily, again, kind of on the theme of too much water and the water quality impacts, or too little water and the air quality impacts, go ahead and put those in the Q&A box. We have about 4 minutes for questions. We do still have our outstanding question from earlier, so let's address that one while we're waiting to see if anyone else has questions. And so the question is to the group, do all USDA agencies or sub-agencies participate in the climate hubs? And if not, are there some you wish would join and participate? And so while you guys are contemplating that question and how you might answer it, I'll say that I did look up our 5-year review document to remind myself kind of how we characterize our relationship with all of our sister agencies. Our climate hubs do embody Secretary Perdue's One USDA approach. We really genuinely embrace that. And so we try to support the broad research and outreach goals that are shared as they relate to climate and agriculture with ARS, NRCS, the U.S. Forest Service. Those are our 3 primary, the 3 partners that probably contribute the most resources. Again, half of us are housed at ARS, half of us are housed with Forest Service, and then NRCS has been one of our biggest supporters over our first 5 years. But in addition to that, we also do work with NIFA and APHIS, FSA, RMA, Rural Development, DRS, the Office of the Chief Economist, and the Climate Change Program Office. So I think that is largely all of the USDA agencies, but if someone thinks I've missed one, please feel free to add.
Well, we should throw in the Office of the Chief Economist, because that's actually where we route most functional activities are housed in the Office of the Chief Economist.
Other things that our panelists would like to add for that response? Again, do all USDA agencies participate in the hubs? If not, are there some you wish would join or participate?
I would just say that I would welcome more participation. We've been working a lot directly with Farm Service Agency and Risk Management Agency, and I think I really enjoy that work. We also have a member of APHIS on our steering committee, and that's really helpful. So I feel like we're here to serve and work with all of our USDA sub-agencies, and we certainly welcome that participation and perspective. And I'd welcome more.
Yep, we love doing special projects. You know, if there's a need that a particular agency has that the climate hubs can uniquely help, or help you find the right partners to answer a question you have, That's our job. We're connectors, so reach out to us anytime. So with that, we're to stay on time, we're going to move forward. Again, keep your questions rolling in. I believe Kurt is up next, but Dennis, did you want to say anything?
No, I was just going to mention there was one more question came in, but if we want to push it off until later, that is fine.
I'll hold on to this next question for our discussion at the end, but thank you for pointing it out.